This is Tim Jones, and welcome to another edition of View from the Bleachers. This week, I want to tell you a terrifying story that actually happened. Now, if you're squeamish, you might want to skip this week's episode and check out one of our more innocuous segments. Maybe the one I did about the sport of cricket. Yeah, now that I think about it, that one is sure to put you to sleep. Anyway, back to my story. When you were young, remember how your parents told you never, ever get in a car with a strange man? Like this guy. Well, that said, I have to say, I love his hat. Anyway, my parents must have lectured me about this 100 times. There are creepy men out there who will kidnap you for their sick and twisted desires. Well, today's episode is the harrowing true story of the time a young, innocent couple accepted a ride from a very strange man. And by strange man, I mean me. More on the other side. Welcome back. The events I'm about to share are real. It happened exactly the way I'm going to describe them. None of the events in this story have been embellished or exaggerated in the least. It was a gorgeous sunny day in the British Virgin Islands. If you've never been to the British Virgin Islands, well, they're a lovely collection of tropical islands just east of Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands in the heart of the Caribbean. Truly a paradise on earth. This is the story of two young people who were deeply in love, who just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. They seemed like such a lovely couple. They had their whole life ahead of them. They were on their honeymoon without a care in the world. And then, well, they made a fateful decision that just might change their destiny forever. They did something incredibly reckless and impulsive, as young people are wont to do. They accepted a ride from a complete stranger. Look at this guy, what a creep! And believe it or not, I saw the whole thing unfold because, like I said, that creep was me. It started out so innocently. Craig and Rebecca were a young couple from St. Louis, Missouri. They were vacationing in the British Virgin Islands, or BVI as the locals like to call it. I now realize I probably should not have mentioned them by name, so henceforth I will refer to Craig and Rebecca as Jeff and Beth from Jefferson City, Missouri, to protect their anonymity. They were on a day trip to an idyllic tropical island called Jost van Dyke, and they had taken a taxi ride to a remote beach where they were just frolicking in the ocean and the waves. And this is them. See how they're frolicking? And yes, this is an actual photo of this lovely couple. Unfortunately for these very kind newlyweds, there was someone else lurking nearby. Me. And my wife, Michelle. It turned out that we had very similar plans for today, as we too were on vacation, and we had just recently been on our own honeymoon, barely 34 years prior. Now, like Craig and Rebecca, Jeff and Beth, we had heard that the most incredible beach in the entire BVI was on the opposite side of this extremely rugged mountainous island, a beach called White Bay Beach. This is a photo of where they wanted to go. The young couple, filled with hopes and dreams, had just one small problem. They had no car. They would have to call a taxi driver and wait 30 to 40 minutes to be picked up. That's when they made what could only be described as the worst lapse in judgment of their very young marriage. They decided to accept my offer to drive them to the other beach. What were they thinking? The four of us piled into my undersized, underpowered, cramped Suzuki hatchback rental car, whose main power source, I can only surmise, based on this experience, must have been 4 AA batteries. While I did not take a photo of our rental car, this is an artist's rendering of approximately what it looked like. Like I said, it was very tiny. I was the driver. Michelle was the navigator. A word about the roads in BVI. Even the very best of them are bad. I mean, really, really bad. Filled with potholes. They're all way too narrow. No lane divider markers and extremely twisty with lots of blind hairpin turns. This is a fairly typical road in BVI. It's a veritable obstacle course everywhere you turn. And if you have to confront all these obstacles while mastering driving on the wrong side of the road, well, imagine my dilemma. That's right, I had to figure out how to drive on the left side of the road, something I had never done before, except in video games. Within moments of piling into our tiny clown car, we unwittingly embarked on a fool's errand to test my driving skills on the most grueling road I would ever attempt in my entire life. Michelle consulted Google Maps on her phone for the quickest way to get across the island to the other beach. Now, apparently, the app must have thought we were using a helicopter or perhaps a zeppelin for our journey because, well, the route it selected took us right over the very top of the rugged, mountainous island. Or perhaps the BVI version of Google Maps was designed by Satan, because someone was sure looking for a way to ruin our day, that's for sure. And I apparently missed the sign that said, "Caution, only idiots are permitted to take this route," because within 1 minute, we had diverged from a paved surface and found ourselves guided by Google Maps onto a dirt and gravel path, barely wide enough for one vehicle. I recall distinctly asking Michelle, "Are you sure we're on the right road? This doesn't look right." To which she calmly replied, "Yes, I'm sure. Google says this is the most direct route." And of course, by most direct route, what Google apparently meant was the most direct route to ensure our imminent death. Very quickly, I realized we had made a horrible navigational error in choosing this route. If this route qualified to be considered a road, well, then having watched 2 seasons of Grey's Anatomy qualified me to be considered a brain surgeon. The trek became steeper and steeper, narrower and narrower. The cliffs were extremely easy to see because there were no pesky guardrails to block my view of the 1,000-foot sheer drop-off. The further we drove, the rougher the terrain got. See this photo? Well, technically this is a picture of a mountain road in Tibet, but I shared this photo with you because I was too busy clutching my steering wheel for dear life to pause to take a photo of our predicament. But I assure you, the road in this photo was much safer than the road we were on. The boulders got bigger, the ruts deeper, and in many places we were attempting to scale an incline with a 45-degree angle or higher, several times transitioning to a switchback, requiring us to make a sharp, blind hairpin turn while accelerating up a steep hill. Then the thought popped into my head, what if we come across another idiot coming from the other direction, following the same terrifying Google Maps route? I mean, there was no way 2 cars could make it through. Impossible. If anybody had been driving from the other direction, one of us would have had to make a very difficult choice to drive off the cliff to our death, because there was no way we could pass each other on this narrow cliffside obstacle course. But I needn't have worried about that possibility because there was no way more than one complete moron would try to cross this highway to hell. As all of our heads jostled up and down uncontrollably with every bump like cheaply made bobblehead dolls, well, I wondered what Jeff and Beth must have been thinking. My guess is something like, "Lord, we will go to church every Sunday for the rest of our lives if you'll just deliver us from this nightmare." Or maybe one of them was pondering, "Why did you agree to get a ride from a complete stranger? Maybe he's a serial killer, or worse yet, a Suzuki used car salesman." The further I drove, the worse conditions became. Then I noticed that the slope of the thoroughfare started to pitch noticeably to the right. I had to fight to keep the car from drifting rightward towards the edge of the cliff. After reaching the summit of the treacherous mountaintop, I thought, our problems were over. Not nearly. Because it turned out that going downhill wasn't any easier. I had to keep pumping the brakes over and over to keep this freight train from barreling over the cliff as I tried to negotiate one 160-degree hairpin turn after another. But I stoically kept my fears to myself so as not to alarm our passengers, except for the 4 or 5 brief moments when I came upon yet another gut-wrenching hairpin turn, and I might have blurted out, "Holy shit, we're all gonna die." Well, I've been to Italy's ancient star-crossed city of Pompeii. 2,000 years later, their roads are still in far better condition than what I had to contend with this day. During our nerve-wracking ordeal, I was increasingly worried that, this might end badly. I had visions of the lead story of the Washington Post the next day. "Tragedy in paradise. Newlywed couple murdered on honeymoon by terrorist suicide Suzuki driver." followed by a related article about how Suzuki hatchbacks are really not recommended for off-road travel. This misguided journey took us over the literal peak of the island, through what was inarguably the most nerve-wracking terrain I had ever attempted. Now, if you could ignore the fact that in minutes, we were all most likely going to perish in a ball of flames as my car's brakes gave way and caused the car to hurl over the 1,000-foot cliff in a fiery crash. Well, if you could ignore that, I have to say, the panoramic view from up here was rather magical. After what felt like 3 days, but was probably closer to 40 minutes, we reached the most beautiful sight that I have ever seen in my entire life: a paved street. I had delivered the newlywed couple to their destination physically in one piece, albeit emotionally in tatters. I thought about asking them for $25 for having provided them with a thrilling memory they'd unarguably be telling their grandkids one day, but Michelle thought that would have been in very poor taste. She's probably right. Hopefully, someday Jeff and Beth will be able to forgive me for the terrifying ordeal that I subjected them to. Probably not. They had to head back home to Missouri the next day. I briefly thought about offering them a lift to the airport, but something told me they'd probably prefer a taxi instead. That's the view from the bleachers. Perhaps I'm off base. I'm Tim Jones, and remember, if you like this video or simply feel sorry for me, please click on the subscribe button and share this video with your friends or anyone else you'd like to annoy. For more of my humor, you can always visit my website, viewfromthebleachers.net. Well, that's it for now, and remember, never accept a ride from a stranger or a humor writer. Trust me about that.